I want to welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. And before we get started, I've asked Pastor Hembrook to lead us in a moment of prayer.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we come before you tonight, grateful for your many good gifts to us, grateful for your church in all places, and for the opportunity that we have tonight to visit with Jed during his itineration. We pray for him, of course, his ministry, his family, for his safety. And we ask now that as we gather and listen, that you would grant to us wisdom and open minds and ears for what we are about to hear. For we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
From its desert coast to the Andes Mountains and the Amazon jungle, Peru is one of the most ecologically diverse places in the world, rich with natural resources. Once home to several Andean civilizations, including the Inca Empire, it was conquered in 1533 by Spain. Due to its vast territory and gold and silver production, Peru was by far Spain's most important colony. Peru declared its independence in 1821, and with the help of General San Martin of Argentina and Simón Bolívar of Venezuela, the Spanish were defeated in 1824. Most Peruvians have not benefited from the nation's abundant natural resources, and I think Jed will probably talk something about that. The majority of the wealth is controlled by a small group of people, primarily of Spanish descent, and by an increasing number of foreign investors interested in the same natural resources. Subsequently, millions of people in the indigenous population live in poverty. Of related significance, Peru is also considered to be one of the 3 countries in the world most vulnerable to climate change. Jed Koball assists in the Peru Joining Hands Network. Joining Hands is an initiative of the Presbyterian Hunger Program that addresses root causes of hunger in partnership with network of churches and non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, in countries with high poverty rates. These networks lead the struggle against hunger and poverty at the local level and are joined by Presbyterian Church USA, presbyteries, and congregational partners that address the same concerns on the global network. Joining Hands Network is a network of 8 Peruvian NGOs and churches located throughout Peru. These 8 come together to identify the root cause of poverty and injustice and to address them in their local context by shaping and participating in strategic advocacy campaigns at the national and local levels. They tackle issues such as environmental contamination from the mining industry, the growing water crisis due to global warming, and trade policies that disadvantage many Peruvians. Jed helps facilitate partnerships between Joining Hands Hunger Program and the PCUSA churches and entities in the U.S. to enhance participation in global advocacy campaigns. He resources the national and local work of the network in Peru as needed. Unfortunately, his wife Jenny is not with us. She is also a mission co-worker in Peru, and she is the site coordinator for the Presbyterian Young Adult Volunteer Program, which sends people ages 19 to 30 to serve in communities of need in the United States and abroad. So we, on behalf of the Mission Outreach Ministries and the session, welcome, Jed. We're so glad to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to tell us about your ministry in Peru.
Good evening. Before I get started, can you hear, is the sound good? Excellent, okay. I know we're live streaming. I was told to make sure you speak into the mic. So I hope folks online, if you're out there, good evening to you too. Thank you so much, Donna, for organizing this event tonight, for the invitation to be here. It's been a number of years since I've been back with you all at the old church. I'm not sure how you refer to it, but that was probably 6 or 7 years, certainly before the pandemic. But it's wonderful to be back with you and in this new space. This is absolutely beautiful. So congratulations to you all. You're catching me on the front end of a 1-month whirlwind tour of the U.S. I arrived this past Friday, and I've just been here in the St. Louis area this past couple of days, and I'll be heading east from here. I'm staying pretty much east of the Mississippi from here on out. And after 1 month, I'll fly back to Peru, where I'll catch up with Jenny and Tiago for about 10 days. And then I jet set again. This time I'll be heading to the United Arab Emirates for the Conference of the Parties, otherwise known as the COP, which is the United Nations annual meeting on climate change, in which they bring together government leaders from around the world, industry leaders, and civil society folks to debate, discuss, lobby for changes and commitments that are needed by nations of the world to combat climate change. I'll be there representing the Presbyterian Church USA as an official observer to the COP. Tonight, while I'm not going to speak directly to climate change, I will be carrying a message with me to Dubai that will be in my heart, and it's a message that should come through my presentation tonight. And it's a message of choosing life, and from the perspective of indigenous peoples in particular. Peru, as Don has already noted, has many indigenous peoples who have often not been heard, whose voices have been silenced for many years, if not centuries. And in this time of climate change, what many indigenous peoples are saying is, if you want to solve the climate crisis, listen to indigenous peoples. If you want to heal the planet, listen to indigenous peoples. So some of what you're going to hear tonight is what I've been hearing from indigenous peoples. Choosing life, dismantling what they may call systems of death, and nurturing systems of life. So I'm Jed with my wife Jenny and our son Tiago. He's 6 years old now, and he's in first grade, and so he needs to be in school right now. So that's why he's back in Lima, and Jenny is with him. Both Jenny and I work for the Presbyterian Mission Agency. We're mission co-workers. Jenny, as Don already noted, works for the Young Adult Volunteer Program, and so she has kept that program going through the pandemic by involving Peruvian young adults. And as of next year, we'll start bringing young adults from the U.S. down to Peru as well. And I relate, I'm a mission co-worker that relates with the Presbyterian Hunger Program. And I have a new job title as of this year. It's a very, very long job title. And hopefully it'll make more sense over the course of this presentation. But I am now the Joining Hands Catalyst for Extractive Industries, Human Rights, and the Environment. I won't explain it now, and hopefully it'll make more sense coming later. This is La Roya, Peru. This, we would say, is a system of death. In La Roya, there's a metal smelter. This smelter was once owned by a U.S. corporation, and it has made La Roya one of the 5 most contaminated places in the entire world. At one point, it was the 2nd most contaminated in the world after Chernobyl. At the height of its production, it emitted something like 2 million tons of toxins into the air every single day, leaving nearly 99% of the children with extreme levels of lead in their blood, in addition to cadmium, arsenic, and other toxic metals. 1,000 square miles of land are contaminated. The river that runs through the town is dead. There's nothing alive in that river. And as you can see by the landscape, nothing grows there. We call this a system of death. This is a system of life. This is about 5 miles outside of La Roya, still contaminated soils there. But there's an initiative here to bring life back to the soils, to get the toxins out through a process of bioremediation, keep water in the soils through reforestation, and to generate basically a new ecosystem. And already there are animal life there, birds and insects that they have not seen there for many, many, many years. This is a system of life. And these are the people who are choosing life. These are citizens of La Roya who live on the outskirts, and they have dedicated themselves the past 20 years to doing the forestation that you just saw and restoring life to that land, while also confronting the system of death that continues to bring poison to their lives. They are confronting the system of death, and they are nurturing a system of life. They are the people that we walk with. And we walk with them alongside with our partners in Peru. Our partners are a network called, in Spanish, Red Uniendo Manos Peru, which means the Peru Joining Hands Network. Joining Hands is an initiative of the Presbyterian Hunger Program, and it brings together churches along with NGOs or not-for-profit organizations to work together in identifying common themes, problems that they can address together. This network in Peru recognizes at the heart of so many issues of injustice, of poverty, is this impact on the environment, particularly from mining. Many communities in Peru are impacted by mining. Peru has a population of about 33 million people, and it's estimated at 11 million, that's 1/3 of the country, are at risk of contamination, of being poisoned from toxic metals from the mining industry. And so this is an issue that they've come together on to address alongside communities. There's a spirituality to this work. And our partners, it's an ecumenical organization, brings together people of Christian faith, Catholic and Protestant. But this Christian faith and their Christian spirituality is informed by indigenous wisdom. There's a philosophy in the Andes that's called buen vivir. Literally translated, it means good living. But some will say a more accurate translation would be abundant life. Something that we hear about in the Bible. Jesus want for all of us to live abundantly, have abundant life. In the understanding of abundant life through this lens of indigenous or Andean wisdom is that our life as human beings is not independent from the life of all of creation. And that for us to have abundant life, all of creation must have abundant life. And so it is incumbent upon us as humans to live in harmony with all of nature. And so it's this essence of being in harmony with all of creation that kind of drives the work and informs the spirituality of our partners in Peru. What does it mean to live in harmony? And this is where the indigenous voices continue to teach us a lot about our own faith, our own spirituality. Because it's important to remember that indigenous voices have long been silenced. And this in Peru, the silencing of these indigenous voices began well over 500 years ago. At the beginning, the dawn of what is called the conquest and colonization of this part of the world. It's said that in 1514 or thereabouts, King Ferdinand of Spain said to his conquistadores, those who were coming to this part of the world, in particular South America, what is today South America, he said to them, get gold. Humanely if possible, but at all costs, get gold. That was the primary motivation for the conquest of this part of the world, was to find the resources, natural resources, and in particular gold, to finance the kingdom back in Europe and their struggle for their own existence back there. They wanted the resources here to fund what was going on back there. And so, to what is today Peru, arrived Francisco Pizarro, the conquistador. And in 1533, he arrived to the shores of what is today Peru. And he made his way up into the Andes Mountains to a place called Cajamarca. And Cajamarca at that time was the Inca, the head of the Inca Empire. At that time, it was Atahualpa. And so Pizarro wanted to meet Atahualpa. And so they come together, and legend goes, they meet in the center of the community. It's sort of like a plaza type area. And beside Pizarro, and this is very important, beside him is a church friar. So the church is there present with Pizarro when they meet Atahualpa. And it's the friar hands to Atahualpa a Bible. The Incas didn't have a written language. Atahualpa likely didn't even know what it was he was receiving, and he sets it aside. Legend again says he then offered to Pizarro a cup of chicha, which is kind of a corn fermented drink. And supposedly Pizarro takes a sip of it and spits it out. But from that point, the church friar then reads to Atahualpa, in Latin no less, a document called El Requerimiento, which is the requirement. This was a document that came from the papacy, from the church. And it was effectively a document saying to the peoples of the land, if you do not convert to Christianity, then we have the right to execute you. And regardless of whether you convert to Christianity or not, we are claiming these lands as ours. And the resources on this land are ours. And we will use you however we want to use, meaning we can enslave you. This was a document that came from the church. It was authorizing land theft, it was authorizing slavery, and it was authorizing execution. And this was a document that formed something that we call today a doctrine of discovery. Effectively, the European conquistadores, the conquest of this part of the land, to claim the land as theirs and all that's on it, and to oppress the people upon it. And so what happened, he read that document to Atahualpa. Atahualpa, of course, did not understand it, and of course, did not convert to Christianity. And so Pizarro had him arrested, had him detained in a room. Atahualpa then offered as ransom for his own release, he offered a room full of gold to Pizarro. Gold, of course, is exactly what Pizarro wanted, so he takes the gold. And not long thereafter, has Atahualpa executed. Thus began 300 years of Spanish occupation of what is today Peru. The Spanish colonization had three kind of axes, three kind of strategies. One was what we call extractivism. That means taking the resources from the land. They wanted that gold and anything else on the land. That was a primary motivation for being there. To get that and to control the land, they also implemented a racial hierarchy, a caste system. And on the top of that caste system were people of Spanish descent, most likely with the color of skin that looks like mine. And those on the bottom of the hierarchy were indigenous peoples and other enslaved Africans who had been brought to that part of the world. And on top of that was this spiritual oppression in the sense that there was an attempt to eradicate indigenous spirituality. And so literally on top of Incan temples, churches were built right on top of them. And an attempt to implement a new spirituality. I would not say it's a spirituality that resonates with perhaps our Christian spirituality today, but it was named as a Christian spirituality. But it was a spirituality that sustained, that kind of supported this idea of extractivism and the racial hierarchy. The land is ours to take and do with it what we want, and the people are to be beneath us. So it was creating this hierarchical system. This, of course, undermined by what I was mentioning, the doctrine of discovery. It was the church authorized all of this. So fast forward 500 years later. Yes, the Spanish left after 300 years. They were defeated and left. But we should probably consider what they left behind. They left behind this thirst for gold. They left behind that racial hierarchy that still exists in many ways. And they left behind effectively a demonization of indigenous voices. Whatever indigenous people think is considered effectively evil, and that is even talked about in some places in Peru to this day. But it's this thirst for gold that continues to drive the economy of Peru. Peru has, ranks very high in the production of gold, silver, copper, zinc, and many other metals. It's a destination for investment and mining, for sure. And it has generated a lot of wealth. the economy of Peru was booming in the early part of this century, right up until the pandemic. It was the envy of many other countries in the world, even praised by the United States as well, as the economy is just doing so well. Even during the 2008, the depression, or recession, thank you, the recession here, Peru was largely unscathed by that because it had so much investment in mining. Oops, I missed a slide, but that's all right. But at what cost? Yes, it generated a lot of money. It created a large middle class, particularly in Lima. But at what cost? These are 5 maps of Peru. This first map is a map of the headwaters. So here are these green and brown areas, the headwaters. These are the Andes Mountains. That's where water begins in Peru. There's ice caps up there, mountaintop lagoons, and from there, the water flows down, either into the Amazon jungle or a little bit down to the coast in Peru. That's where water comes from. The next map is a map of mining concessions. So that is land that has been licensed to mining companies so that they can dig it up and look for gold and silver and copper and all the metals that we use in everyday life. And you can see they're located pretty much in the same place where all those headwaters are. The next map is a map of environmental liabilities, contamination. So mining is very difficult to do in a clean way. And when there are not too many regulations, it's easy to contaminate a whole lot. And so there's a lot of contamination from these mining projects happening in this very same area. Here's a map of the highest levels of poverty in Peru, where poverty levels are above 50%, and this is before the pandemic. These are extreme levels of poverty in the very same area, up in the Andes Mountains. And these populations are predominantly of indigenous descent. So these are people, Andean people, Quechua-speaking people, and they live a rural subsistence level of life that's very dependent on a relationship with the earth for their alpaca farming, their potato farming, their relationship with the earth is essential for them. And here is a map of social conflicts in Peru. The red areas being the areas where there are the most social conflicts and most intense social conflicts. By social conflict, I mean where there's a conflict between a community and either the government or a community and a company. And most often, the majority of these social conflicts are with mining companies. And so it's communities who are Andean communities of indigenous descent, dependent on these headwaters, who are having their land being given away to mining companies who are mining it, contaminating it, further impoverishing the people, and of course it generates a lot of conflict. When I arrived to Peru in 2009, this conflict really came to a head in many ways in a place in the northern part of Peru, actually on the going down the other side of the Andes Mountains towards the Amazon jungle, where some indigenous folks were protesting. They were protesting because the government had recently passed some laws that would open up more access into the Amazon for mining, for oil, for big agricultural projects, to effectively take down large swaths of the Amazon and potentially contaminate them. And so the indigenous peoples who lived in that area didn't want that to happen. They were opposed to these new laws. So they protested by blocking the main highway that led into the Amazon. And they just sat and held vigil on this highway for days on end, trucks lined up for miles and miles and miles. And so the president was upset by this. So he goes on television and to make a plea to the people for actions he was about to take to address the situation. Because for him, opening up the jungle for further exploration would stimulate the economy. So he went on television and told a story called The Garden Dog. And effectively, it's a story of an owner who had a garden, and the owner has some dogs to protect the garden from passersby, so that passersby would not steal the fruits from his garden. And one day, in this story, the owner dies. But the dogs continue to obey their master, and they don't let anyone into that garden ever again. And the president goes on to say, those indigenous peoples sitting on the road up there near the jungle, they are the dogs. Television calls them the dogs, saying they're not letting anyone into the garden, our garden, to enjoy the fruits. And by fruits, he means the oil, the gold, etc., that's in the Amazon. And so a few days later, he actually has the national police open up fire on the indigenous people, and dozens were killed. And the pathway into the jungle was opened. This was the beginning of many, many, many protests throughout the country in defense of indigenous peoples. And so our partners at that time, we said, what is our role in this? Who are we in this story? And we said, we're the people who are going to walk alongside the dogs, the ones who others refer to as dogs, the ones who have been repressed, whose voice has not been heard, the ones who need to live and want to live in harmony with the earth in order to survive and live. Our story began in a place called La Arroya, which I spoke to earlier. And I want to tell a little bit about that story, where we were, where we are today, and perhaps where we may be going in the future. So where we've been, again, La Arroya, almost 99% of the children, severe lead poisoning, 1,000 square miles contaminated, land that is no longer fertile. And with the thanks of Giddings Lovejoy Presbyterian, who came alongside our partners, there was a lot of advocacy on behalf of the people of La Arroya. And eventually, in 2009, when I arrived, there had been so much pressure, international pressure, local pressure, that the government finally took away the company's operating license. And so they stopped operating, and they eventually went bankrupt. And they shut down the plant. That was never our objective. It was never our objective to shut it down. Our objective was for the plant to abide by environmental policies that it had agreed to abide by but never did. They said the policies, after having signed a contract that said that they would abide by these policies, they later said they're too expensive, they're more expensive than we thought they would be, so we're not going to do them. So eventually their operating license was taken away. That plant has not been operating since 2009, and it's still in question of whether it will operate again. But regardless of it operating or not, there is still contamination in the soil. People are still getting toxic metals into their body. And so our work began, at that point, shifted to look at specialized healthcare and environmental cleanup and enforceable regulations for La Arroya. And we achieved a law in 2017, a regional law that did just that. It was a regional law for specialized environmental and healthcare. But then we came to learn that the regional government really could not do anything about that law on a local level unless national law was changed. And so at that point, we began to look for other communities around all of Peru that were also impacted by toxic metals. And so from around the country, from the jungle to the mountains down to the coast on Lima, there are many, many, many communities impacted by toxic metals and contamination. So we came together, all of these communities, and advocated for a national law. In the middle of the pandemic, that law got passed. A national law for human and environmental health for communities impacted by toxic metals. This law will require the government to implement, provide the resources and a plan specialized for every area of the country to be able to address the specific needs that they have in relation to the contamination in their area. Now our work is actually implementing that law. It's one thing to get a law passed, it's another thing to actually implement a law, and that's where the heavy work is coming right now. Our work in La Arroya, I wouldn't say it's come to an end, but we are shifting away from La Arroya. We are still accompanying folks in La Arroya, but they are well organized, they are well trained and well prepared at this point. And there are other communities from among these who have come together that don't have the training and don't have the skills to be able to advocate for the implementation of this law. And so we have moved to a place called Callao as of this year. I still relate with La Arroya. When I get back to Peru, I'm going to go visit La Arroya. We still have a strong relationship with them. We have not abandoned them, but the heart of our work is now in Callao. So if you ever have traveled to Peru, or if you want to travel to Peru, you'll fly into the city of Lima, the capital. But technically, the airport is not in Lima. Technically, it's in Callao. So Callao is adjacent to Lima, and it's a port city. The airport is there. The main shipping seaport is there. All the trains from the Andes Mountains that bring the stuff that's mined, all the ore, it all comes into Callao and then gets shipped around the world. So from Callao, things go around the world, and from around the world, things come through Callao. So there's storage containers throughout all of Callao that have minerals in them. There's small factories throughout Callao. There's a big oil refinery in Callao. It's just this massive industrial complex. It's an industrial port city. And that comes with issues. We have 3 principal issues in Callao that we're addressing right now. One is due to the oil refinery. It's owned by a company called Repsol, which is an international oil company. And they had an oil spill there. It'll be 2 years ago in January. And a massive oil spill that just left, beaches along the coast totally contaminated, where a lot of fisher folks are. So the fisher folks can't fish there anymore. Many of them have moved away. The water is not suitable for bathing, for anything. A superficial cleanup was done, but there was a lot of oil that is on the bottom of the sea, and it's still impacting the ecosystem and making the water dangerous for fishing and for bathing. So that's one issue. A second issue is some of these small industries. In particular, there's a battery production company in the heart of Callao. The area was zoned for things like making bread, for like food production type, and clothing, things of that nature that wouldn't necessarily generate a lot of contamination. Those zoning laws have not been respected, and so there are now companies that are producing things like batteries. There's a lot of chemical production companies for pharmaceuticals, and there's no proper regulations or infrastructure in place to keep it healthy. And so right in front of the battery company, there's a school. And studies were done not long ago showing that all the kids in that school have lead poisoning because they're downwind from that factory. There have not been studies done on the entire community that's behind that school. So it's likely that many, many, many more people also have lead in their blood. And nothing has been done about that. And then there is a river. This is actually part of a river, one of 3 main rivers that feed the Lima metropolitan area. This is called the Chillon River. It's the most contaminated river in Peru. Part of it is because of waste, that humans, toss into the river because there's no sanitation system. And so folks who, particularly more impoverished folks who come to Lima, to the Callao area, they just find land wherever they can. Sometimes it's along the riverbed, but there's no infrastructure there for them. There's no sewage system, no sanitation system, and so everything just goes into the river. There's also factories along this river, into chemical factories, and waste is going into this river. And then way upstream, there's also mining as well, in which waste also goes into this river. So this river is dead. It's a very dangerous river. People who live there remember 50 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, it was a clean river, and they would bathe in that river. And now no one can go near that river. And these are leaders in the Callao area who are organizing. We're trying to bring folks who care about this issue, folks who care about this issue, and folks who care about this issue all together in the same room to be able to get to advocate together for the specialized health care for the people impacted by this and the necessary environmental protections for the area and the cleanup. So that work has began just this year. And so we're in a place of mapping out the area. Who are the actors? What are the places that are really contaminated? Just kind of understanding the situation and then articulating our message. So that's what we've been doing this year, is working with these leaders on being able to tell their own story. So that's where we are today. Where we might be going. Now, this relates a little bit to my new job title. I will continue to be living in Lima, Peru, continuing to accompany the folks in Callao, but I'm also going to have, I'm starting to have a broader view of what's happening not only throughout Peru, but throughout Latin America and even throughout the world. And one of the issues that we are hearing about from communities throughout South America, in places like in Republic of Congo and Cameroon over in Africa, is a mining boom that is starting to happen. And it's a mining boom that's really going to explode over the next 10 to 20 years. And it has to do with climate change. Now, whether one believes in climate change or not is irrelevant, because the issue is this. There's going to be a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energies. I know that may be debated in many places whether that should happen or not, but around the world we know it's going to happen regardless. It's going to happen, and it's already happening in many places. So again, whether you believe in it, whether you want it, doesn't matter, it's happening. And I personally do think it needs to happen. I do believe we need to move towards renewable energies, but I also believe it's going to come with great cost if we don't do it right. And the cost is this. Of all the critical minerals needed for renewable energies, think of solar panels to the electric grid, and in particular think of batteries in electric cars. They require a lot of critical minerals, things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, and many other minerals. There's never been massive scale mining for these types of minerals before. And now suddenly, we need them in great quantity. And the US needs them, China needs them, Russia needs them, all of Europe needs them, and they want them now. That means we gotta find them and dig them up as fast as we can. More than half of those critical minerals that we need around the world are located on or right next to indigenous lands. And the people living on those lands sometimes are saying, yeah, well, we don't want you to mine that. We want to keep our land clean. So we have a problem. We do need, whether we think you need it or not, it's going to happen. We need to have these renewable energies, but we need to make sure it happens in a just way, a transparent way, and a sustainable way that respects the people who've been living on lands for many, many years, hundreds of years, if not millennia, who have in many ways already faced this issue 500 years ago and the ensuing years after, when the conquistadores came for the gold. Originally they said, get gold humanely if possible, but at all costs get gold. Today it feels like leaders of the world are saying, get lithium, get cobalt, get nickel, humanely if possible, but at all costs get them. Many say we're repeating history if we're not careful. And so this is an issue that we're beginning to monitor, and we're connecting with folks around the world to make sure those voices are being heard in the conversations in places like Dubai, where I'll be in November. Because folks want those metals right now. But there are people who are living on those lands where those metals exist, and so we need to hear their voices. And so part of my work then is to help form what we're calling a global solidarity network. The idea is to bring together folks with facing similar impact around the world, such as what's happening in Peru with folks in Argentina or Cameroon, alongside Presbyterians as well, and folks in the US, because there's lithium in places like Nevada, and there's indigenous peoples there saying, wait, hold on, we don't want this mining to happen. There's copper mining in Arizona, and indigenous people saying, wait, hold on, not on this land. So it's in the US, it's around the world. And Presbyterians, many care about this. And so we're trying to bring folks together so that we can educate ourselves, learn about what's happening, support one another, and encourage one another. And when it's right, to help act together in collaborative ways. Right now, we are at a place of learning. And Donna has been a part of our first learning session. It was a book study we did this past month. We just finished last week, in fact. A book called The Land is Not Empty. Following Jesus and dismantling the doctrine of discovery. So the doctrine of discovery, that doctrine that the church helped author 500 years ago that said, go get the land, at whatever cost, basically, get it. It feels like that doctrine is still alive in some ways. Even though the church did repudiate it, the Presbyterian church repudiated it in 2016, more than 500 years after it really came into being, but it did repudiate it. But to repudiate it means, we need to perhaps take some action as well, because it's still bearing fruits, this doctrine of discovery. So how can we come alongside the people that the church helped silence and helped try to eradicate so many centuries ago? And so this book was written by a Native American who's also a Mennonite, Sarah Augustine, and she helped us understand what it means to follow Jesus. So having a Christian spirituality, a Christian practice, and coming alongside indigenous peoples in defense of their land. So we're learning together. And we do hope that in our learning we'll find ways to collaborate together. We don't know what that looks like yet, what actions we'll take, we don't know yet. But our hope is that we can support and encourage one another in taking actions. And perhaps most important of all is accompanying and caring for one another. Because this work is hard work, and at times it's dangerous work, in particular for indigenous peoples who are on the front lines of this, because sometimes their lives are at risk, such as what happened in Peru when the police opened fire. That happens around the world. And so we need to care for and accompany one another in this struggle. And that means perhaps opportunities to travel to places like Peru to come alongside the folks we're working with there. Perhaps they'll come here. Next time I'm in town, I hope that I have some Peruvian partners with me. Perhaps going somewhere else in the world. But being together, accompanying one another, encouraging one another, and learning from one another. That's what this Global Solidarity Network is about. And so you are invited to be a part of this network if you want to. You can just write me. Soon we'll have some thoughts about what our next activity might be beyond after this book study. But hopefully we'll be hearing more from partners around the world from places such as Peru. So I'm going to end it there and open it up for questions or comments. But thank you very much for giving me this space and this time to share something that's dear to my heart and to so many of our partners around the world. So thank you so much. And I've been told if you do want to make a question or a comment, you should probably go to the microphone so that the folks online can hear it. Or I can take the microphone to you, I suppose. A lot I just shared. Is this working? Okay. Yeah, it's overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed by it, and I try to remain hopeful. It's scary work at times, and it's certainly overwhelming. But I do find hope, and when we come together with folks who are impacted by this, who haven't given up, and despite knowing what's happening to their bodies, to their land, to their communities, to their children, Perhaps I feel no option other than to have hope, but I know that I have to carry that hope with them. If nothing else I can do in this world is to help carry that hope forward. And sometimes I think that's my main purpose in this world, and in my role. It's just to be there and be present and to keep that light shining, keep that light burning.
What are some of your day-to-day things that you do to be this kind of work?
It varies. Some days are with the folks in the community, long days. Like we've been doing this exercise, a mapping exercise. So we're out there in the community, walking around, identifying sources of contamination, identifying who the actors are, who are the people doing the contaminating, but also who are the people most impacted by this, and trying to put the pieces together. And then in a room together with those folks of literally drawing maps, but then identifying names and companies, and then really putting words to what they're experiencing. So there's work in the community. Then there's work from Peru come back towards the U.S. that may be things like the book study that we did. Certainly connecting with churches via Zoom, writing. And then there's connecting with other organizations in Peru. So I'm also a part of a network called Churches in Mining, and churches from across Latin America who are all addressing the issue of the impact of mining in Latin America in particular. And one thing we recognize as the church, we're trying to identify our particular role as the church in all of this. Sometimes the church can bring, expertise, and technical knowledge, which is very important. But there are also people outside the church who do that. There's not-for-profit organizations, NGOs, who are doing that work. And one thing we've recognized is that one of the gaps in this work are indigenous, or frontline defenders is what we call them. Sometimes they're indigenous, but not always. The people most impacted, who are the leaders in their communities, who are the most open, most outspoken, they are at great risk. They receive threats to their life and constantly harassed, and they don't necessarily have anyone walking alongside them, accompanying them, encouraging them, helping keep them safe. Even at times, their very own churches will turn their backs on them because it's considered too political, too dangerous, or it's a different spirituality or a different theology, and so they feel abandoned by their own churches. So are there others of us in the church who can then come alongside them, offer them comfort, accompaniment, and support in different ways when they do run into trouble, to advocate for them? But also, what we're even digging into deeper right now is recognizing the trauma that they all experience. And I think, coming out of the pandemic, I think all of us have identified trauma in more profound ways. And so that's something we're trying to address, the impacts of trauma. And now we're looking at it in relation to communities impacted by this kind of contamination. So is there something about trauma that we can help them with, identifying the trauma and how to cope with the trauma? So that's so I'm working with this Churches in Mining network on that right now, on coping with trauma, and we're at the early stages of that right now as well. And that's why I'll be going back up to La Arroya when I get back to Peru. We're going to do a workshop with some of the leaders in La Arroya who've been most impacted, who've been most threatened, and most traumatized over the years, and to help them begin addressing that trauma in healthy ways.
I know prayer is important,
Yeah.
but what else can we do sitting in our comfortable homes to assist in the work?
I think, yes, prayer. I think when the opportunity is right, you feel called to it. I think, Donna joining us for the book study is something really important. I think I overstate the importance of learning that we need to do. I want to be careful because I think when we look at something like that, we look at, so there's mining for all these minerals and metals, things that go into stuff that we use every day. I'm so dependent on the cell phone, but it didn't materialize out of thin air. It came from somewhere. And it's easy to fall into this trap of guilt. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm the one I'm complicit in all of this. I think a more helpful way to look at it is that we're kind of trapped in all of this. We were raised this way. It grew up around us. And so we don't know any other way to live. And I'm not saying, and so I think so often people want to say, okay, I don't want to be complicit anymore, so I'm going to stop doing this, I'm going to stop doing that. And that's fine, that's good. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I think it's important to recognize that we're part of a system. We're impacted by this system as well. So this system has formed us to be consumers, and so we consume, and we need to consume in order to survive. I mean, if I were to move back to the U.S., I would need a car. You can't really survive here it's difficult to survive without a car. There are many people who don't have cars, and they're having a hard time surviving here. And if I came back here, I would get a car, and I would probably want to get an electric car because I think that'd be the responsible thing to do. But I also know that the minerals that go into that electric car are impacting someone back in Peru or somewhere else in the world. And so it's so easy to fall into this trap of guilt. But I think, we think about what is the individual thing I can do? And while that's a good place to start, just to recognize how we're part of the system, I don't think us addressing, while I'm not saying we shouldn't address our particular lifestyles, at the end of the day, that's not going to be what solves the issue. What solves the issue is addressing the systemic issues, which are, a lack of enforceable laws that protect communities and the environment. So if that means, okay, we shouldn't do lithium mining in this particular area because it's going to contaminate the waters, it's going to impact the people there, so we don't do any lithium mining there. Well, there may be consequences to that. That may mean there's less batteries out there. I don't know. So then we got to live with that. That'll shape how we live in this world. And we're going to have to make some difficult choices like that. So that comes back to learning. We need to learn the systems of this world and the places where we can address them in meaningful ways. So whether as a part of a book study, we'll offer more studies like that, or opportunities to learn from partners around the world. I really think this is a time for us to learn, listen and learn. And then down the road, we'll figure out, okay, these are meaningful actions that we can take. Otherwise, sometimes we start to just take action so we stop feeling guilty. But those actions don't necessarily lead to anything really productive. So how can we take meaningful actions that are going to be part of something that is more helpful? Hope that's a helpful answer. Listening and learning. And that doesn't scratch the itch, I know. The itch is, what can I do right now? And I've got that itch too. But what I've come to learn is that I've got a lot more to learn.
What is the government's attitude towards indigenous people at this point?
They see them as an obstacle. And I'd say most governments of the world see indigenous peoples that way, as obstacles to development, and they may say, they'll probably speak out of both sides of their mouth, saying, yes, we care about indigenous rights, while underneath the table, they're pulling the rug out from underneath indigenous folks. Because they see the gold. There's this huge lithium deposit in Peru. And there's just dollar signs all over that, and they can make it, this sound a logical argument. We mine that, we can make a lot of money, we can distribute that money, we can fund these programs, et cetera. But experience tells us that's not what happens. So all of that economic development that happened in Peru for 20 years, the veil was ripped off of that when the pandemic came, because over 20 years, nothing was invested in the health system of Peru. Nothing was invested in the educational system. So when the pandemic hit, Peru had the highest fatality rate from COVID in the entire world because there was no oxygen production. They didn't have oxygen tanks for the people. And people were dying in the streets. And there was no way to continue the educational system. So there was no in-person school for 2 years. So kids are all behind. Everyone has lost many, many friends and family. I think Jenny and I, we counted up with something like 26 people we know, friends of ours died during the pandemic because of COVID, because they couldn't get into a hospital, they didn't have oxygen. So what I'm saying is, yeah, there's this logical argument they'll make, yeah, we can make all this money and then we can invest in all these systems, but that's not what happens. Not only does it not get invested in services, social services, and things of that sort, communities are impacted by the contamination that comes with it as well, because there's also nothing invested in environmental controls or regulations or environmental monitoring or things of that sort. And because there aren't those things there, it makes it a very attractive place to invest in mining. So it's a vicious system, and it comes with this argument of how great it is for the economy. It's great for some people, but for a lot of people, it's not. And yet we do need it. And that's the conundrum. In La Roya, no. Right, in their blood. Yeah, so at that, when we first started in La Roya, the World Health Organization had a threshold of something like 10 milligrams per deciliter of blood. Later, they lowered it to 5 milligrams a deciliter of blood. I think today they say really anything above 0 is dangerous. But we were seeing kids with like 80 milligrams per deciliter of blood. It was really high levels. And even after the emissions stopped, we did more studies showing they were still many in the 20 range. So it's in the soil, it's everywhere. And the company would say, well, it's only because they would blame the people, saying, well, you just need better hygiene habits. You need to wash your hands, right? So I guess they call that gaslighting today. And those are strategies that are often used in many places in the world. If there's contamination, they blame the people, as opposed to taking responsibility. I don't mean to end on such a sad note. I enjoy this work, and I do have hope. I find it very meaningful, and yes, overwhelming. But I feel it just gets to the heart of so many issues in the world. A world that feels like it's convulsing at times from, just these systems of death. And yeah. That's there's no one's attributed to that art, so I don't know where it comes from. I've looked for that myself. I don't know where it comes from. Me too. I'm glad. Thank you for recognizing that. But I will continue to search for who it is. That's Peruvian, or at least Andean, but I would say probably Peruvian. Yeah. Yes. A lot of it's leaving the country. So it's some of the major mining companies are foreign mining companies. So most of these mining projects, the major investors are either probably from the US, Australia, China. China is probably the biggest one at this point. Canada, and some European. And so a lot of the money leaves the country. There might be then some minority owners or minority mining companies from Peru, and they're taking still a rather large share. So there's a huge, huge wealth gap in Peru. There's some extreme wealth, and extreme poverty. And you don't have to go far to see the two. But what's not happening is it's not really getting invested in the systems and services and structures of the country. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are royalties certainly, that go back to the government. Yeah, people do get very wealthy. There's also, and I don't want to attribute all to this, but there are very high levels of corruption as well. And so it is hard to follow the money at times. There's still a lot of the wealthier families and probably have some more direct ties back to Spain. A little bit of that wealth is filtering or trickling down, you might say. But no, the vast majority of the impoverished are of indigenous, direct. They say in Peru, if one doesn't have some indigenous in their blood, they've got African blood in their bodies. So everyone has a little bit of DNA, so to speak, from indigenous, African and Native American in their bodies. But there's still a pretty significant class system in Peru. While it's not, officially recognized, it's certainly culturally recognized. And we go into a long dialogue about race and class in Peru, but it's pretty substantial.
Thanks for the work that you are doing, and
Thank you.
others like you.
Thank you, Joy. Yes, thank you, Donna. Yes, I'm not alone in this work. There are many other Presbyterian mission coworkers doing really tremendous works, not necessarily in the exact area that I am, but addressing really significant issues around the world. So please continue to support Presbyterian World Mission, whether it's the work Jenny and I do or we, all of us do together around the world. So thank you so much for having me tonight. Thank you.